We've talked in other episodes how to reinvent your physical plane of being once you quit your addiction to alcohol, but what about the emotional plane? Equally important, and I'll set you on the path of recovery, which AA doesn't do in this episode. More than once, I have spoken of the reinvention of the 4 planes of being during the process of alcoholic recovery toward that road to cure. The physical plane, the emotional sphere, advancement of career, and finally the spiritual realm. In a previous episode, I covered how to regain the physical plane, which has been damaged by long-term addiction to alcohol. The recovery that largely consists in return to physical fitness and decent diet, what I refer to as the foundation to the construction of your new mansion where you will reside for the rest of your life. But what about the emotional plane? If the physical plane is the foundation of recovery, then the emotional is the framework that holds the rest of the structure together. Like the physical sphere, the emotional component of being has also been destroyed over the years due to the long-term association with that toxic friend John Barleycorn. Of course it has. The mind's been in a state of alteration due to the alcohol or in a state of daily withdrawal from it, waiting the hours to the next indulgence. Anyone who is long-term recovered from alcohol addiction will look back and be in dismay to what their mentality was in those days with Johnny B. When I think back to almost 2 decades ago, it is like recalling a completely different person, someone that I'd rather forget ever existed. For as alcohol makes one physically unhealthy, it also annihilates the emotional plane as well. And simply giving alcohol up does not automatically bring health back to the mental mindset. Do you remember what you were like in the days of alcoholism? In the beginning of recovery, it is not much contemplated as you're just trying to get through those initial stages. But as the years pass, one will be in disbelief that he ever allowed himself to live in such a chaotic and ill fashion. The lack of judgment when the brain is marinated in the sauce or daily recovering from it. The emotional instability, the people who were drawn to you, the ones who weren't. When I recollect that persona, it is like looking at a film of a different life altogether. For myself, I remember existing in a constant state of anger. And being a member of the medical profession, I had good reason for this anger. Physical therapy is a wholly and completely corrupt profession that is largely more interested in profit than patient care. If one's going to be ethical in this field, then one is not going to have a great many friends in it. But the levels of rage were not justified to the wrongs. Today, many years from that last drop of John Barleycorn's poison, the little I do work in the trade now, I operate under the stoic mindset. Either another practitioner is an ally, or I am indifferent to him. Ironically, I found that this apathy has a much greater effect than anger on those who aren't ethical. Of course, for most who abuse alcohol, the emotional typhoon began long before that first time the bottle was uncapped. The bottle just became the later refuge from the effects of what was usually a rotten childhood. The pattern is usually the same. Trauma in youth results in deficits in adulthood. The adult has greater difficulty coping with these deficits, which makes him an outcast of various sorts, whether it's obvious to those around him or not. So he deals with this anguish with that very bottle. Then years pass, and one day he realizes he is now physically addicted to that daily trip to the liquor store. This is why just giving up the substance doesn't solve the emotional distress. That turmoil existed before the liquid demon walked through your door and will remain in your house after you throw it out, unless you reconstruct your emotional plane. There is a difference between the emotional roller coaster that one goes through in the withdrawal phases of the initial alcoholic recovery and the much longer-term emotional distress that was planted in childhood. In previous episodes, I have instructed how to get through the first 30 to 45 days when the brain is thrown into one of the lower levels of hell. And these emotional fluctuations will continue with great frequency to the 6-month mark of recovery as well, in which they will lessen over time if one engages in complete and holistic recovery, a recovery that Alcoholics Anonymous does not offer in its failed program. But while one is in these initial withdrawal stages, once one passes that 45-day mark, which I label as a second phase of recovery, one should not only begin the physical fitness program, but the emotional reinvention as well. It is correct that the recent addiction alone has left deep neurological patterns that have been engraved for years whose trails lead to mental unrest. and new neuroplasticity paths need to be cut into the brush for sure. But the next milepost of third phase recovery to 6 months is also when one reinvents his emotional plane. He designs a structure that is far more solid than prior to when the addiction began. This is where the childhood is confronted and your sword is thrust right into the heart of those ancient demons of the past. This is where AA fails and fails hugely. For the protocol of Alcoholics Anonymous not only doesn't begin the path for mental health improvement, but actually keeps its members in a state of emotional toxicity. Perhaps this is why they have such a high failure rate. If one remains in emotional unrest, it is far more likely one will fall back into the anesthetic that alleviates that unrest. And this mental unrest is propagated by AA in several fashions. First, they install into the newly sober's minds that they are diseased, that they are forever ill. I noted in another episode that alcoholism may be genetically predisposed as a potential addiction. I would contend that it is true that some may be more prone to develop alcohol addiction than others, but it isn't a disease like cancer. To become addicted is a choice. That's it, and that's all. Telling someone that they are forever diseased is terrible for their self-esteem and emotional health. He will walk out of every meeting feeling like he is deficit, which is not true anymore. One was deficit when in the midst of the addiction. The protocol, once one ceases the addiction, should be the road to emotional cure, not instilling a mindset that one is living an indefinite illness. Another reason emotional health is not regained in Alcoholics Anonymous is their methods keep the former alcoholic forever in his past. As I've stated before, there is a time to, quote, tell your story, and that time should be in the first few months of recovery. One does have to gain understanding that he was an alcoholic by listening to others with the same tale. One also has to comprehend that he can never touch the offending substance again. It would also be a good time in early recovery to go back and analyze why he started the addiction those years ago. This self-analysis will usually take him back to his childhood woes. Then the process should be to fix those mental deficits, not keep regurgitating them over and over in every meeting, which he is telling the same tale 20 years later because his psychological addiction is now to the rooms. The emotional health is never recovered in the AA program, because if the members were mentally recovered, they wouldn't still be going to AA years later. I cannot see how anyone with a few years of sobriety can feel good after coming out of one of these highly negative meetings, especially if they're going most nights. I stated before that AA should be a weaning off process, as the main focus should be to reconstruct those 4 planes of being and then to go on with their new holistically healthy lives. Now, AA will counter that their meetings are not negatively focused. You've got to be kidding me, AA. You're dumping caffeine and sugar into your system every meeting in between your smoke breaks outside, which directly affects the well-being of your emotional plane. You're telling each other that you are forever diseased with no way to cure. You install that the AA program is for life. Added to which, you sit in a circle and tell the same tragic story over and over of your chaotic alcoholic days. You may be 10 years sober, yet continue to relive how you lost your spouse and job due to that friendship with JB. Maybe you aren't telling your story every single meeting, but you're listening to the negative tales of everyone else, as you watch most of them fail in your largely failed program. Jim Rohn once said that the 5 people you spend the most time with will be a direct reflection of who you are. And take good heed of this advice. The largest social group you have is one where most won't stay sober and the others are hysterical in their cult-like addiction to the rooms. Now let's look at my program. As said, the physical fitness regimen alone, addressed in other episodes, will greatly improve one's emotional health. But there is more you can do to give yourself a better emotional state than before you even picked up that bottle. It requires a pattern of habits that don't take a great deal of time, but will be consistent daily. The first is to add a mind workout on top of your physical workout. An additional 15 to 20 minutes a day. I've stated before that the physical program should be 45 minutes to an hour of mainly cardio exercise. I'm adding another 20 minutes that you can engage in a quiet room in the gym or at home when you return. The program can vary. You can practice yoga, tai chi, qigong, or any form of sitting meditation. Whatever program seems to bring you the most peace will work. Second, you learn how to control your breathing when you feel emotional distress coming. You can use the same meditative breath techniques while sitting at work and no one will even know that you are doing it. You set up 5-minute sessions a few times a day, constantly feeding calm into your mind. If you do this, you will find the emotional distress will greatly decrease in frequency and intensity. The combination of the physical fitness regimen with the emotional program is lethal to those symptoms that continue in your recovery to the 2-year mark of cure. The emotional fluctuations in that first 6 months will diminish with these techniques. The anxiety will still be there as well as depression. That waxes and wanes in the initial trial, but the symptoms will be less intense. More importantly, once past the 3rd phase mark of 6 months, they will slowly reduce to only transient at times, if you continue the program of mental recovery. The periods of calm will continue to lengthen as the symptoms of unrest decrease. The nice thing is that in today's technological world, you don't have to join a yoga or Tai Chi studio to engage in this mind workout. YouTube is a wonderful thing which you can utilize and never leave the house. I come home from the gym, drop my bag, and immediately do my 20-minute routine. Like I said in the physical fitness recovery episode, people will tell me that they don't have time, yet forget they spend hours a night drinking in their former lives. Not to mention, most people spend twice as much time on social media daily than what I am prescribing for the physical and mental program. The other branch extending from the tree of your new life is the confrontation to past demons that led you to the path of alcoholism to begin with. In my days in the physical therapy clinic, it was often a sad witness to see patients, alcoholic or not, who mentally remained in their days of trauma. It's a nice thought to believe that in the end, all past wrongs done to us are resolved, but that is simply not so. Many go to their graves existing in the same mental tragedy where they lived decades prior. The demons stay with them until their last breath. For the alcoholic, past traumas must be resolved. I'm not saying that one will ever forget those turbulent times. It is much like an old scar that is healed, but every once in a while the person will still notice it. But the emotional crisis will never end for the person where the cut is still an open wound. For myself, at a few months sober, I disappeared into the mountains of California for 4 months, coming out only to resupply my backpack. I had no music, no outside entertainment, only the sounds of nature. I went back to early childhood. I reviewed the family trauma, the fear at school for 3 years, the isolation in my final year of high school due to social anxiety. I examined how all this led to an inferiority complex that was compensated by extreme physical prowess in bodybuilding, military endeavors, and martial arts. I thought about every chaotic female in which I had relationships. There was no white noise now to mask the why. The stinking truth was because I didn't think myself good enough for decent. It is extremely difficult to face these kinds of truths. But once they are faced, you begin the path to eliminate your emotional deficits. 3 years into sobriety, I gave an hour-long seminar to the community of Sitka, Alaska on myofascial release for hiker injuries. When I looked at the recording a week later, that inferior complex person was no more. I had command demeanor of the stage with full confidence. And I never dated a chaotic female again. I attribute this new person to the emotional recovery program I just described. As with every episode, I ask at the end, which sounds like a better plan for overall health and happiness? A program where one sits most nights in a room he's afraid to leave? An environment where you're surrounded by chaotic people? A constant regurgitation of the past of alcoholism spewed from the other members, matched by additives of sugar, nicotine, and caffeine, all which cause emotional fluctuations? Or would you rather pursue a life where you exist with a largely tranquil mind? An emotional state of mostly peace. I say mostly because in the game of life, not every day is a perfect one. You will still have ups and downs like everyone else who walks on the terrain, but I can promise a better existence for one who follows my method of reinvention of self than the one whose life is surrounded by the tenets of Alcoholics Anonymous. If you wish to be a permanent member of negativity and fear, then continue to follow the AA protocol. Or you can choose a protocol that leads to health, peace, and tranquility. Now for some more on how to completely recover your being after alcoholism, go ahead and click on the playlist card at the end of the video, and check out my more detailed guidebook, Reinvention of Self, How to Change Your Life and Being Forever. Link is on the video description as well as the channel page banner. And remember, you made the contract, now keep it. Be sober at sundown, and I will see you at the next sunrise.